So we're in a series that's a little bit longer than a series normally would be. Normally we have about 6 weeks in a series, but we're on week 9 now of this series called Dream, Risk, and Create. And I'm going to make this really practical and applicable into your life and your circumstance today. Because we live in a world that is full of people who are full of pain and full of difficulty, and you probably find yourself surrounded by people with struggles as well as your own struggle. You probably find those people around you, and you probably find that as a result of that the world that you live in has a whole load of pain and surrounded in that circumstance that you're in. And I'm sure that there have been many times when you have felt like you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Have you ever experienced that? There have been so many occasions when I've felt that, if I was somewhere else, if there was a different time and a different moment. Timing is really, really important in our lives. And this was really proven to me a number of years ago that Nita and I used to make this podcast that would, so it's like an audio radio show that you don't listen to live. It's put on iTunes and people download it and listen to it on their phones or their iPods. And there was a little bit of a formula we had to our iTunes podcasts. In fact, one of them did so well, it even knocked Joyce Meyer off one of the top spots at one point. It was, that was claim to fame. It only happened for like a few seconds, and then we were back down again. But I screen saved it and, got the picture. But the formula was that we would interview someone who had some gathered wisdom in their life, and then in the middle of it, we would have a prank that we played, and then we would finish the second half of the interview afterwards. And there was a prank that I played on a friend of mine who was a pastor in a church in the Midlands, and he was about to move to Spain to be a missionary in Spain. And this guy who was an ordained minister about to move to Spain, I'd had a conversation with him a few weeks previously, and he'd said that what he was looking to do to fund his mission work, that he was going to try and get some opportunities to sing crooning songs in the clubs in Spain. He was a bit of a Frank Sinatra and Elvis fan, and he would love to sing the repertoire of those songs. So he said that I'm hoping to find some work and that will fund me as a missionary. So I had a friend who had a strong Spanish accent, and I had him phone up this guy and pretend that some way he had found out he was moving to Spain and that he ran a series of nightclubs and would like to offer him a possibility of working for him. So we were recording this. We had the technology to record the phone conversation. So it goes like this. My phone friend phones him and says, "Hi," and he says, "Hello, who are you?" I said, "Well," and he had a good Spanish accent, which I'm not going to even try to reproduce. No. I can't do everything for you. You have to use your imagination. It's called Dream, Risk, Create. Come on. So in this really good Spanish accent, which you're all imagining really well now, he said, "I've been given your name by a pastor in the area who tells me you're coming to be a missionary, but you sing Frank Sinatra, and we're always looking for people to work in our clubs." And this guy, my friend, on the other end of the phone, this pastor, he got very excited and said, "Oh, what a weird phone conversation. I was only talking to someone a few weeks ago about this." Didn't twig whatsoever. So I'm talking a little bit longer, we're recording this. I'm in the office in stitches now, trying not to be heard on the recording. And he said, "Well, listen, I'm over in Spain in a few weeks' time, so it'd be great to meet up." And my friend said, "Oh, that'd be lovely." But he said, "Just to make sure that you're not wasting my time and I'm not wasting yours, I wonder if you could do a song over the phone for me." And the pastor said, "Well, this feels very strange." But he said, "Funny you should mention it. I've got a backing track on my computer." So he plays this backing track on his computer, and he starts singing, "Come fly with me, come fly, let's fly away, dun, 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 dun." And he's really going for it. I'm absolutely in hysterics on the floor of my office. And this guy, the Spanish accented guy, did very well holding it together. And he let him do the whole song, and we're recording it. We've got it all firmly recorded. And he said, well, listen, I'm just going to go and get my manager to come and talk to you. That was really good. And then I come on the phone and say, hi, Dave, it's Mark Pugh. You've been pranked for the Serious for God Leaders podcast. And he goes, oh, I knew it was a joke. I knew it was a joke. Of course you did. Of course you did. Well, it worked really well, and I think probably the reason we knocked Joyce Meyer off her sort of number one wasn't because of the quality of everything else. It was because people tuned in for the prank. They liked people getting caught out. But the person that we interviewed either side of that was a guy called Cy Rogers, who specializes in speaking about issues of sex and sexuality to the church. And we did this really frank interview with him. I mean, it was really frank interview. And so he did 10 minutes, then we had the prank, and then he did 10 more minutes, part one, part two of the interview. Well, anyway, a number of weeks later, when that pastor was being sent out by his church to start his life as a missionary, now realizing there wasn't a proper job on offer, but he was stepping out in faith, the lead pastor of that church thought it'd be a really good idea to play that prank to all the congregation. What a great send-off. It'd be great to have a laugh. But the sound guy started it at the wrong place. He started it on the interview. At the moment when the word, and I'm just scanning the age of the group that we've got, when the word that came out of his mouth, the single word, was the word masturbation. There was a bit of an awkward silence, just like there was then. Pastor said, it's the wrong place, turn it off, turn it off. So they fast forwarded it to the second half of the interview, which was more explicit than the first. I won't tell you what he said at that moment, because some of you are trying to work out what that first word I said was right now. Timing is really, really important. And there are times when we feel like we've got the wrong thing being said at the wrong place at the wrong time. But Jesus is absolutely always bang on time. He always has exactly the right thing to say to the right person at the right time. And we are going to look at a story this morning that highlights this very truth in a really powerful way. But it doesn't just highlight that Jesus is the right person in the right place at the right time, but it highlights that the places he has called you to means that you are the right person in the right place at the right time. You see, I find that sometimes there are places that we find ourselves in that we begin to resent. And actually, they're places that we've been sent. Some of you despising your workplace right now. You're despising the illness that you're facing. You're despising the circumstance of your life. Don't resent it. Understand that you've been sent to it. I'm going to unpack that for you. Sometimes the people who we find and think of as the problem, God has called us to be the solution. Yes. Because God's timing is perfect. Spot on. Let's look at the Gospel of John, chapter 4, to a very well-known story. If you've been in church more than a year, in any form of church, I'm sure you've come across this story. So where Jesus speaks to a very large lady, the woman of Samaria. It's rippling around, isn't it? John chapter 4. Father, I pray you'll quicken this congregation this morning. Help them, Lord. It's just taken a while. John chapter 4. It says, now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact it was not Jesus who baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now he had to go through Samaria. Let's just stop there a moment. The reason that he left was because Jesus wasn't wanting to get into a political battle that the nation had been longing for a Messiah, and they'd seen someone that would come in on a big horse and overturn the military establishment. And that's not what Jesus' purpose and style was in coming and announcing the good news of the kingdom. And so there was a movement beginning to grow, a messianic movement, and so he needed to get out of there because that's not why he was there. That's not what he wanted to be exclaimed as. So he left. And we read that he went north back to his hometown in Galilee. This is a bit of a journey, and the quickest way to do this route was through the area that would have had quite a lot of the sort of Samaritan influence upon it. Samaritan territory would have been the place where this main high road would have been. Now, just about the use of this road, many Jews just refused to use it. They wouldn't ever be found walking on that road because, and we're going to look at more of this historical history in a moment. That's what history is, it's historical. Same word, different expression. That the reason why the Jews, many of them wouldn't travel that road was because they felt it would pollute them. It would damage them. It would stain them in some way. It would be a shame for their life. There was a history of a conflict between these two groups. It goes back to pretty much the time in Deuteronomy 27 when Moses, just before they're about to enter the promised land, he decrees that there should be two groups of people, and one should worship on this mountain and one should worship on another. And we read in a few moments' time that this lady at the well that we're about to be introduced to makes reference to that historic argument. And as a result of that, there all sorts of differences have developed over the years. And now these people were the no-go people of their community. I don't know what the no-go areas of your life are, but I love the fact that Jesus just storms right through them. Yeah. I love that there is absolutely no no-go area for Jesus in this city. And there are sometimes places that the churches fear venturing into because we're afraid it will pollute us, and Jesus walks right in there. Yeah. And he just walks right across those places that people are concerned that it will affect them, it will somehow damage their spirit, it will pollute their life. And I just love that Jesus is there. Yeah. I love that there's no place of iniquity in this city that Jesus is not right in the midst of. Right. I thank God that when we gather together, we experience the presence of God. But there are places all over this city that people can experience the presence of God because Jesus is there. Yeah. He's not just here. He's there. And I love that the call upon us as the church, that the very term disciple means follower of Jesus. And to be a follower of Jesus means we must walk to places that other people refuse to walk. It means that it doesn't matter how unpolitically correct it is. It doesn't matter how fear-inducing it is. It doesn't matter what the perceived consequences by the world around us. If Jesus is walking there, we should be following him. Yeah. And Jesus walked right in there. I love that it says, look at this together with me. Verse 4, it says, now he had to go. He had to. He didn't have to at all. Geographically, there were other options. The other options were the options taken by the other Jews on a regular basis. This may have been the most direct, but he wasn't having to do this journey for geographical reasons. This wasn't the direction of his tom-tom, his sat-nav saying that you have to go the quickest route, Jesus. Let me tell you why he had to go. Because Jesus came to this earth to declare the good news of the gospel for all people, all nations, all tribes, all people, no matter how much they've failed, no matter how much they've done wrong, no matter how bad they are about themselves, whatever they've got into in their past, Jesus has to declare the good news of the gospel. That's why he had to go. Because we read in a moment that this lady that he meets is representative of a society who felt like they were second class, who felt like they'd been ostracized, and they've made loads of mistakes in their culture. But Jesus had to go because he had good news. The church has to go. Seriously, we have to go. There's no question. There's no option here. If we don't have to go, then we're not following Jesus. It's the reality. We can become comfy and cozy within our churches. We can become pleased at the blessing of the Lord on our lives. And we can say, God is wonderfully with us. But if you're not following him to the places that we have to go, you're not following him any longer. You've distorted the purpose of God. We have to go. Jesus had to go. We have to go. Look, verse 5. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy some food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Stop there a moment. This was a bad place culturally. This was a bad time. This was noon. Mad dogs and Englishmen are the only people that are out in the heat of that sun. This was a bad, bad time. And the reason that this lady was at the well at a bad time was because she was a bad woman. Because she had probably been rejected by her own community because of her loose living, because of her sinful state. And so she did not want to be caught in the middle of a crowd of people who would whisper and condemn her. So she went when no one else was mad enough to go, except Jesus. Bad place, a bad time, a bad woman. But Jesus saw none of those three things. He just did not see them. Because for God, for Jesus, this was a good place. Because the earth is the Lord's and everything that's in it. Even the red light districts belong to the Lord. Even the nightclubs belong to the Lord. Even the prisons belong to the Lord. This was a good place, not a bad place. This was a good time. This was a time of encounter, divine encounter. And Jesus saw it was his perfect moment. He knew she was going to be there. And this was his divine working to conspire for this moment. And he knew that beneath all of her shame was a good woman that was made in the image of God. Let's unpack this further. Verse 10, Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock?" You know, this woman, her first defense was that it's inappropriate for Jesus, a man, a Jewish man, to be talking to her. I think that there's a trend in life and in society for people to articulate offense very quickly. I find that people are often on the edge of anxiety, on the edge of shame, on the edge of disappointment. You know, I remember a couple of years ago just doing our weekly shop at a supermarket, and I was pushing my trolley, and I just caught the ankle of the guy in front of me just a little bit. I mean, it wasn't hard, it just touched him. Do you know what? He turned around and said, "Do that again, I'll flatten you." I said, "Come on, if you think you're hard enough." No, I didn't. I said, "I'll pay for your shopping." He was big, man, he was big. That wasn't about the trolley. That man was on the edge. That man was living 99% of his, on that threshold of tipping point. I was just the 1%. It was irrational. You know, most of us, this comes articulated in our driving, doesn't it? Of course, Christians never experience road rage. It's amazing. We judge the motives of people we've never met before. We see someone slow to pull out of a junction and going, "What are they doing? They shouldn't be on the road. They're a completely unsafe person. I bet they're smoking. No, they're on their phone. Look." We make judgments about people, and it's not about that moment. It's about us being on the edge. This lady, she began to just articulate some an offense that you shouldn't be talking to me. And I find that so many people, they find it so easy to come up with the reasons why they shouldn't receive, why they shouldn't hear. Spoke to someone last week and began to talk about the gospel, and they said, "Oh, I'm scientific. I'm an atheist." I said, "Oh, that's really interesting, because I know science teaches you not to believe in anything you can't prove. So please, can you tell me how you've proven there is no God?" I'd love to hear that, because I've never met a scientist who's ever proven there's no God. And as long as there's a doubt, science says you should keep exploring. You should keep pursuing the evidence. Now, let me tell you about some people who have done that as atheists and have actually given their lives to Christ. Because the scripture says, when you seek after God, you find him. And even when you, with an open mind, look to disprove him, you'll find him. Sorry if you're an atheist watching online or listening this morning here, and you're thinking, "I'm going to find the truth that's going to reveal that God is a figment of people's imaginations." Do you know, I want to pray the blessing of God and the God you don't believe in onto your life, because I want to tell you, if you really seriously mean that you're genuinely going to pursue with an open mind, you will find God. Yes. See this lady, she kept focusing on the offense, but Jesus, he wasn't distracted by that. He didn't begin to get into this argument of, "Listen, I know I'm a Jew. I know that not many of us come on this road." But he knew that there was a true answer for this lady's life. And Jesus, he gave a better answer than the question she was posing. You know, politicians today, they're trained to be media savvy and to not answer the question that the interviewer asks them. And they get someone like a Paxman interviewing, and who often on Newsnight, or he was, and he will often not take an evasion of a question for granted. He will push again, and he'll keep pushing. And the politicians will keep changing the subject. And they change the subject to something that they want to grab a headline, or something they want the public to understand. Jesus wasn't changing the subject because of an issue of spin here. Jesus was changing the subject because she was asking a question that wasn't the best question. And he had the best answer. He said, I can give you water, living water, you'll never thirst again. I love that her response to that was that Jesus had just revealed something heavenly, and now she's saying, where's your bucket? Don't you realize how deep this well is? I've been here many times. I know there's not another well, so, I know that you've not got anything else up your sleeve here. So where are you going to get this living water? You see, Jesus was revealing a heavenly truth, and she was bringing it down to an earthly reality. And so often in our conversations, we find that there is that diversion away from an eternal truth into a present need. But Jesus didn't get impatient with that. Verse 11, let's read it again. Sir, the woman said, you have nothing to draw, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than the father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his livestock? Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I will give them will become in them spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to him, Sir, give me this water so that I will never get thirsty and have to keep coming here to draw. See, she kept focusing on that dilemma. I'm thirsty. Actually, Jesus, do you know what? It'd be really great if I didn't have to keep coming out in the noonday sun. It'd be really helpful to me. Think of the time I could save. Think of all the embarrassment of avoiding all those people on my journey. Jesus, if you could just help me with my shame, if you could help me avoid crowds, that would be great. That's what she was saying. Jesus said, actually, what I have for you is much deeper than that. It will not cause you to avoid shame. It will cause you to be free from it. I'm revealing something to you where your life will never, ever be the same again. The woman said to him, verse 15, give me this water, I will not get thirsty, I have to keep coming here. He told her, go call your husband, come back. Oh, I don't have a husband, she replied. Jesus said to her, you are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you have had 5, and the man you're now with is not your husband. What you have said is quite true. Sir, the woman said, I can see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors, they worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place we must worship is in Jerusalem. Woman, Jesus replied, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans, you worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in the spirit and in truth. The woman said to him, I know that Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Then Jesus declared, I, the one speaking to you, I am he. Oh, I'd love to have been there at this meeting. This just reads like a drama. This reads on so many levels. You can see the emotion of the woman. You can see all of those questions going on in her mind about the shame. If he's seen that, what else has he seen about my life? How does he know all this? But then she starts talking about mountains. He's just highlighted something that could have only been revealed by God. And she starts talking about arguments that go back hundreds and hundreds of years. You see, the woman was living in her history. So she was drawing from a historic well that went back generations. This well had been a well of blessing for Jacob, given to Joseph. This had kept people watered for hundreds and hundreds of years. This had been such a source of blessing to so many people. You know, I understand that so often the temptation in our lives is to keep drawing on those things that have been in our past. If your last experience of God goes back years, you've missed out. It always grieves me when I hear people talking about the good old days. Partly because our memory is often selective and we tend to remember the good moments slightly more. And actually, we sometimes forget about the pains that we experience at those moments and those times. That our memories play tricks with us. But if Jesus is the right person in the right place at the right time, if he has placed you as the right person in the right place at the right time, this could be the good new day. This could be the good new moment. Say, well, the sort of pain I'm experiencing right now in my life, the mess I've made, the things that are going wrong for me, the health problems I have, I get it. God gets it. But he is with you. And if you keep following him, you will see him reveal that he has placed you in the right place, the right person, the right time. It's a church in the north of England where they had a child that was born with a rare condition that meant that this child was hospitalized pretty much permanently. The hospital were very, very good. They went to a specialist children's hospital and they provided a family room and they virtually lived there, really cared for this precious child that had so many health complications that was not allowed to leave the hospital. Do you know that family? They could have had serious questions about how does this happen? Why has this been allowed to take place? Why am I going through this? Why is our child going through this? Do you know what they did? They began to build relationships with other parents who were also in the same situation. Do you know they began a life group in the hospital? Do you know they did a Christmas outreach where they had about 200 people from the hospital come to their Christmas outreach? Do you know they prayed? Do you know they formed a choir of parents in the hospital that gather together, sharing their sufferings and their disappointments? And do you know that couple, those parents, they knew that despite their pain, they were the right person, the right place, at the right time because they were following Jesus. And you know the dreams that God places in our hearts, you know, often they have their outworking into other people and other lives. You see, the dream that Jesus had here was not of a woman who was in a bad place with a bad history, not in a woman who was in the wrong place at a wrong time and a bad woman, but Jesus had a dream for her life that was her being liberated. He had a dream for her whole community, that her community would be liberated. And Jesus was ministering on the basis of a dream, on what he knew was a possibility, what he knew was going to happen. So often we live on our historic blessings, past blessings. So historic well, she lived in the historic well of the past. That's where she was getting her sustenance from. She lived on historic arguments that defined her. She knew all the arguments all too well about the dissemination of Moses, talking about the two mountains. She knew all of that. And see, the controversy of that came particularly when Solomon built his temple, and now that was the place of worship, and Samaritans said, no, and they adopted lots of foreign gods into their midst, and it all went wrong. But they'd missed what God was doing. She lived with a historic well for her blessing, historic arguments to define her. And now she shared with Jesus about a historic failure. Those relationship mess-ups that she'd made in her life that made her a pariah to her community. She was an untouchable. She was a leper-like person in her community. And the shame, she deserved to be in the midday sun. She deserved the judgment of the heat. She deserved the ostracization from her community. She deserved not to be adopted and loved by the Jewish community. She had deserved where she was. But Jesus didn't speak to her history. He spoke to her future. And Jesus doesn't speak and look into your history to define you. He looks to your future. He looks and he says, listen, you're drawing from this historic well. I've got another well for you that fulfills you way beyond that water. There's a well of life that will bubble up from within. You won't need a bucket. You won't need to travel to draw water from it. I've got a well of life that you can know, bubbling inside you 24/7. Do you know that life? Do you know that life this morning? If you know that life, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't know that life, then you can. Future fulfillment and satisfaction from the living water. That Jesus spoke into future peace and reconciliation. He said a time is coming when the discussion of the mountains is irrelevant. I've come to bring relationship. People will worship God in spirit and in truth because of relationship and life that flows in them. Because it's a real reality within them. Not a law, but a reality, a revelation. And Jesus, when he sees this woman, he's not highlighting her sin to condemn her. He's not saying you're a really bad woman. You know, let's talk about the lessons that you can learn from your failures. Sit down a minute, pull up a couch, woman of Samaria. Let's analyze the decisions that you made. I've got this good psychometric test to look at your propensity. You know, maybe there's some problem that you just need to learn the lesson of and move on from. But you see, and I believe in counsel, and I believe in psychotherapy, and I believe in all of those things. But none of those things can get rid of your past. You can learn from your past, but they can't get rid of your shame. Only the gospel of Jesus Christ takes our shame, nails it to a cross, and says, you live no more. That's why we get excited in our worship. Because when we look at the cross, when we're reminded that Jesus hung there, we're seeing the moment when our shame died, never to be resurrected. Jesus looked at this woman who was living in her history, and he saw a woman who was living in her future destiny. There was forgiveness over her life. There was freedom that was going to come in her life. There was hope. And she was going to spread that to her community. In fact, let's read what happens. Verse 39 says this. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in Jesus because of the woman's testimony. She said, he told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, we no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world. Yesterday, it was a great day for the city yesterday afternoon. A number of us leaders in the city met for a few hours with a lady called Danielle Strickland, who's Canadian, now lives in the States. This lady, for 20 years, she's a Salvation Army officer. She has been pounding the streets and helping those who are just messed up in life, rescuing people from traffickers. She's stood in front of government agencies and she has campaigned. She's traveled the globe just speaking hope into people's lives. And I tell you the reason she does that is because she's not looking at the history of people that she's working with. She's looking at the future that God has for them. She's looking at the possibilities. She has a dream that disadvantaged, messed up life that's in front of her, that's been so abandoned, so abused, so untouchable, that there's a vision and a dream for her life or his life where the gospel can bring change and transformation and they will never be the same again. And the gospel that you and I carry, it's a gospel that should not end with us lifting our hands in worship and saying, thank you, Jesus, for saving me. It should not be amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. The next part should go on and say, and I'm going to take this to the ends of the earth and see all the other wretches come to faith in Jesus and for their blind eyes to be opened and for lives to be transformed and communities change forever. God help us if we just a gathering of people just singing nice songs about that wonderful moment of salvation, and we keep singing about a happy day like it's a historic moment instead of a present reality, where we forget that we are dancing in the middle of a party of salvation, and Jesus calls us to keep inviting others because the party didn't finish the day you gave your life to Christ. It just began. And God has called us as his people to carry on inviting people to live that party. I know some of you have lost that party. Some of you have lost that joy. For God's sake, for your sake, get back in the party. Come in from outdoors. Put those things down that are keeping you in the cold. Come on in. Dance. There's no quiche. Rejoice. See, when the church of Jesus Christ doesn't just talk about a party, but lives a party, that's the moment that the world, they look on and they say, why are you partying? You know, the world's a mess. We've got all these ideologies, all this terror and fear, all this volatility in the world. Why are you partying? And they try and bring it down to an earthly conversation. And we lift it up. And we say we're partying. Because look what Jesus has done. Evangelism is nothing more than inviting people to a party. That's what it is. The reason we don't do it is not because we're so much scared. It's because we've stopped partying. And we feel it's giving out leaflets to something that we're not in. It's easy to walk around the world and keep reinforcing history, to allow the woman of Samaria to keep taking the issues back to the past. It's really easy to get drawn into those conversations. Those conversations exist around us so much. The scripture says that the kingdom of God is not a matter of talk, but a matter of power. It's not a matter of eating and drinking, it's a matter of power. It's a reality to be experienced, not a philosophy to be discussed. You know, I find this to be such a rich vein of wisdom and truth. I know people that have dedicated their lives to study this book that don't know Jesus. I know people that get sidelined by all the different nuances and discussions. I know there are people that began to talk about which mountain we should worship at, figuratively speaking. You know, what's the new way for the church to engage? How do we do this? What's the best way? You know, should we have women in leadership? Should we do this? Should we be involved in this? And we get involved in discussion. And the kingdom of God is not a matter of talk. It's a matter of power. Yeah. By all means, have those discussions while you're taking a breather from the front line. Yeah. Yeah. But don't have those discussions instead of going there. God help us to be a church of dreamers for others. Dreamers for those around us. You know, some of you you've started to define the people in your workplace, the people in your family you've defined as people who will always be outside of the party. Do you know what that will do? That will cause you to live out that expectation. Do you know what will happen if you have a dream of standing next to them on Sunday and seeing their arms raised to God and saying, God, you've saved my life? Just imagine that for a moment. Just imagine that difficult family member. Just imagine that difficult work colleague, fellow student, that awkward neighbor. Just imagine that problem that's a right pain in the derriere to you. Just imagine that person sitting next to you with tears rolling down their cheeks because they were once blind, but now they see. And it takes getting a dream for their life. And every time they unpack their history, every time they unpack their heritage, every time they keep looking back, that you keep looking forward because you've got the dream of God for them. And you know that God has bigger things for them.